You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 24. I'm your host, Chris Webster. Today I interview Michael Ashley of the Center for Digital Archaeology, and we talk all things digital site recording. If you ever wanted to know what the process was, what the flow was to digital site recording, this is the show to listen to, and this one will get you started. Let's get to the show. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. It's just me today as Chris gets settled in his new life in New Zealand, so hopefully he'll be on in 2 weeks for our next show, episode 25. But episode 24 is featuring Mr. Michael Ashley, co-founder of the Center for Digital Archaeology. Michael, how's it going?
It's going really well.
Nice. So why don't you tell us what the Center for Digital Archaeology is? We had you, we'll link to this in the show notes, but we had you on a couple of years ago on the CRM Archaeology podcast, and that was a little more general discussion about digital archaeology. But we're going to get into some other stuff here this time. So why don't you start us off by telling us what the Center for Digital Archaeology is and what you're doing now.
Great. And thanks again for having me. This is awesome.
No problem.
We started the Center for Digital Archaeology back in 2011. Out of UC Berkeley. We specifically were trying to help all of us who are in the realm of archaeology and CRM and culture heritage take good advantage of digital tools. And it's just been amazing. You know, we're still dealing a bit with the kicking and screaming into the 21st century issue on the one hand, and then at the same time being epically surprised about all the remarkable capabilities that we're now seeing and emerging. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're celebrating our 5th anniversary in April. And I assume as we go through the show, I can talk a bit more about it. But the core things that we have been doing over the past 5 years have been about actually developing technologies, specifically a content management system that's open source called Mukudu CMS, which principally helps indigenous communities save, preserve, and share their digital culture and heritage. And we have a web service that helps with that. And something called Codifi, which is our paperless collection, curate, and web platform, which I guarantee we'll talk about today for sure.
Nice. Well, Codifi is probably mostly what we're going to talk about today. But before we get there, we were talking in the pre-show about really just nailing this down and what this means and setting us a foundation for this because, I talk to a lot of people, you talk to a lot of people, and the big buzzwords out there are digital data, and collecting things digital and doing all this stuff. But I don't know that people really understand exactly what that means from start to finish. So why don't you sort of kick off this discussion and guide us through what that means to create, use, and then archive digital data?
Yeah, it actually is a surprisingly fertile ground for conversation. So here in the United States of America, I think a one surprising fact would be that about 20% of our nation doesn't have internet access. Just think about that. You go over to Africa, when nearly 97% of the continent of Africa, it's not a country. Doesn't have internet access. So that's the first thing though, is that we still have I'm here in Marin County, very close to San Francisco and the San Francisco Bay Area near Silicon Valley. And the assumption is that we have all the data we could ever eat and we all have digital devices. And the reality is that even as we do this recording on Skype, the world is connected. So you would think that that digital recording and the production of data, and in the pre-show, the setup here is that we need to talk about the difference between, say, data as things that we can do stuff with, and documents, which is actually what we do most of the time. So the two kind of core documents we see in archaeology in 2016 still are Microsoft Excel as a database, and Word documents, and actual like documents that are generated or converted into other things like PDF documents, and that's pretty much about it. So
right.
That's kind of sadly about 90% of the resulting stuff that's done digitally, even if we're out there using really fancy things like differential GPS units and drones and all this other stuff. At the end of the day, what's generated, in fact, generally required by law, are paper forms, and that still happens to this day worldwide. So we need to kind of, what I hope we'll do in this conversation is talk about kind of putting paper in its place, understanding the benefits, and really getting into like the carrot moment of this, like all the cool things we can do without getting blinded by the whiz bang. And at the same time, I heard a fantastic term this weekend. I'll share who and why. But we're also producing what we might want to call technical debt, which is building this huge capital expenditure of debt that our future generations are just going to have to deal with, which is like the stuff that we used to put on CDs. Remember CDs or floppies or zip drives or in some form of Microsoft Access 2000.
Yeah.
And these are very, very scary, serious issues that I also think we should talk about a little bit.
You still find I don't know about the 5 1/4, but definitely the 3.5 inch floppies. Did I get that right? It's either 5.5 or 3 1/4.
Both.
I don't know. Both. Yeah.
That's
so you still find those in project folders at the BLM when you go to do a lit search. You go back far enough, and they turned those over with their project. And I mean, I don't know how you'd think there'd be a whole box of them if there's like a report on there, because they didn't hold that much information. But yeah, you still find those. And I'm willing to bet most of them are unreadable at this point. Not only unreadable from a hardware standpoint, like who can actually plug that into something, but unreadable from a magnetic data standpoint. Like it's just gone. So, and before we get too far with this, you mentioned having, how the sort of quote unquote digital that people do these days is basically Microsoft Word and Access and creating site forms and things like that. To play devil's advocate a little bit, what's wrong with that? We're talking about CRM archaeology. We're talking about people who are just going out doing surveys. Why do I need to get some big complicated database? Why do I need to collect my data any differently than I've been doing it for the last 40 years? What's the big deal? I'm an archaeologist. Why do I need to do that?
So without pulling out what's left of my hair. Okay. So on the one hand, nothing. Like if the forms that we're asked to fill out provide an opportunity for us to formulate excellent interpretations of archaeological sites, and this term that we like to use, differentially share that back out. So what I mean by that is, if that form that we're collecting very precise geolocation data and site information that can't be shared with the public, could magically split itself into a bunch of different parts and also be usable in curriculum for K-12, or it could be shared with the tribal owners or indigenous communities that may be, whose land we might be disturbing, or when we pull out the backhoe and pull out the site, or we do rescue archaeology, if those forms are actually sufficient and not just recording, but actually truly telling the story of what happened when we did the archaeological assessment and what actually happened in the past, I'm in. But I'm right. In. So it's but they're not, and we all know that. So if we all think about the kinds of archaeology we do worldwide, so not to just focus on CRM, so let's talk about quote unquote, as I say, academic archaeology or research-based archaeology. The main job that I do, Chris, all the time is what we have now lovingly called data therapy. So data therapy is we sit down and people say, okay, well, this is what this is what we've been doing for 5 years, 50 years, literally 150 years. Like back in when Chicago was digging a site in, say, Israel. Yeah. This is what we've been doing forever. And we're still trying to find records that were done at the turn of the century to turn that into knowledge now in 2017, say. That's the idea. What we want to be able to do is have everything that's ever been said about this site, not just the site, because the site boundaries change over time, but the area, the place, the survey, ceramics, human remains, whatever it might be, at our fingertips in real time, so that we can actually make better decisions in the field and we can tell better stories down the line. Almost everyone I talk to says that's actually what they want. So let's just take those two contrasts. camera A got a bunch of physical written documents that are sitting in someone's shelf that we can copy and make copies of, that someone has to go back through, which could be tens or hundreds of thousands of pages. Camera B, we have a way of actually having thoughtfully converted that into searchable data so that we can actually pull things together at the moment that we're trying to make decisions about, okay, so is this a feature? Like, should we like keep digging, or is this something that actually indicates some interesting thing about the past that we might want to tell in the future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So basically the litmus test for me of every method, physical, analog, digital, whatever, is what are the research questions that are driving you? And what are the best tools to help you answer those questions? Which sounds like science, sounds like good methodological practice. It just turns out that now, and it's funny because I just said, I gave a keynote talk last year, and I said for the first time, it really felt like just last year in 2015 that we'd finally kind of turned the corner where in certain cases, digital is actually better than analog ways of doing many different things. And it just is. That's a truism now. And it's not just my opinion. I mean, it's like, again, we're just looking at our ability to do things. And that's why we digitize everything,
Yeah.
We keep converting paper after the fact into digital stuff, which in many cases is handwritten things by people who are dead.
Yeah.
And that sucks. I mean, you can't go back to these people and ask, on page 75 of your notebook, the thing with all the coffee stains where you said, aha, and you can't read a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So we have a technological debt, but we also just have a debt service in generating a physical or digital archaeological record that's not usable by people.
Well, and you're talking about tech debt and archaeological debt going back to people who are dead. The unfortunate thing is CRM in this country, as you know, is like one of those check cashing places. We just keep going back and back and back because there are people listening to this podcast right now, I'll guarantee you, that are digitizing paper site forms into Word documents. I mean, that's all they're doing. They're going to spend their whole day doing that. And they all just turned off the podcast. So let's talk about them. But it's not their fault. It's not their fault.
Let's buy them beer or
yeah.
whatever. Get them
exactly.
Let's at least get them standing desks.
Exactly. At least stand up while you're doing this. Yeah. Or treadmill desks so they can pretend they're surveying. How about that? Yeah.
There you go.
But no, so bringing this back a little bit to the stages of digital archaeological data, we talked about, the need and why we should start creating data digitally. And we're kind of moving into how we use that. Because I think one of the things I've always said is half our job as CRM archaeologists. Academics are a little different, but as CRM archaeologists, half our job is to satisfy the client's needs and create the report and give them the notice to proceed and record all the sites and do the survey and stuff like that. The other half of our job is sharing our information and sharing what we did and telling people about it. And so in CRM, we call all the things that we create, from the report to the site records to the field notes to everything, we call it gray literature. And we say that somewhat disparagingly because we know that we're going to spend months writing this fantastic report and literally nobody's going to look through it. The agency's not going to look through it. They might skim through it, make sure all the right parts are there and everything, and then they kick it back to you if it's not. But realistically, nobody's going to look through that. And the agency looking through it doesn't really count because they don't care. They just want to make sure it was done properly and they're not doing anything with that information. The client's certainly not. They're looking at the front page, the management recommendations, and they're saying, okay, yeah, I can go dig here, or I've got to spend another $2 million. That's all they care about. So we call this gray literature. And I feel like if we collect stuff the way that you were talking about in the beginning, we can help sort of bring gray literature into the light, and bring it out of the dark gray dungeons that it lives in, and help and share this with people. And that doesn't just mean, this is why we're talking about the stages of digital archaeological data. That doesn't mean typing your site forms into Word documents. That's not what that means. And as far as I'm concerned, a Word document is not digital data. It's the digital representation of your paper site form. But it's not digital data because it's not searchable, it's not usable. So I've heard people before. I heard somebody yesterday say that they saw digital data from somebody when all they meant was PDFs on a CD, and that was it. And I was like, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what digital data means. So moving on from here, I'm wondering, with the methods that you're creating and the methods that you're promoting, what can people do? Getting into the using phase of this, what can people do with their digital data if they correct it right? What are some of the possibilities for people who just don't have any idea what to do with these data? Like, why should I collect digital data when all I need to make is site forms? What is the reason they should do that, and what can they do with it, or what can other people do with it, more importantly?
All right, so great question, and I want to bring some other entities, if you will, into the conversation here.
Mm-hmm.
I was really fortunate to have participated this weekend in LA at a board meeting with the Institute of Field Research. So the Institute of Field Research is offers field schools around the world. So they have a good sense of what's happening out there, and the whole concept of the session was to bring together all of us who are kind of working in this digital field to rap about different approaches to doing exactly what you just described. So we had FAMES, the Federated Archaeology Information Management System. So it's Sean Ross, in fact, that was the guy that was talking about this whole technical debt, which is really a fantastic concept. We had open context. We had Eric and Sarah Kanza talking about open data and big data, really cool things. We had the Center for Digital Antiquity. We do get mixed up a lot, but they focusing on TDAR, and I heard it was really fantastic. So Adam Bryn was there, and his colleague Leanne, we're her last name right now, but they were some interesting things there. Just to kind of cycle back a couple of minutes on making that gray literature less gray, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sharing it out, but also talking about some of the epic challenges here, and that's going to be my segue in just a second to talk about how we need to start addressing the way that we collect data. So let's just take a look at the challenge. You have an archaeological site report. You have a primary form. That primary form, almost every single time, can't be made public by itself. If you put that form into TDAR as it is, you're going to give away, as it were, the exact field location of things that could necessarily need to be protected, could be sacred to people. I mean, I also want to call out. So the next actor on the stage I want to bring back is the Society for American Archaeology's Principles of Archaeological Ethics, which is just touches on your point of we're in the intention of that, written in 1996. So we're talking a long time ago, right? 20 years ago. It's actually being reviewed right now, which is fantastic. And public reporting and publication, records and preservation, training and resources, the intellectual property, public education and outreach. These are the core ideas. So the idea is that it is actually incumbent upon us for at least the last 20 years, so let's just call it, say, pre-digital, so forever, for us to produce knowledge that can be shared and that is accessible to various publics, plural. So by that we mean A has to be intelligible. So if we just give people like a sheet of numbers that count bones that are made out of animals of various forms, that's not really useful by itself. You need to be able to produce the reproducibility factor. We need to be able to have information in a form where people can go draw their own conclusions, or maybe even reinterpret. And then on the CRM side, how many of us have had to go and collect? I mean, you just are doing this right now, where you go back to the various information centers and try to get information back out about the site areas that you're now tasked to record. Right. And yep. I don't have to fill in the rest of the sentence because we just lost another 17 people on the podcast. So yes, having a digital version of a PDF version of a site record that may or may not even be OCR, so that's optically characterly recognized, into a form that's searchable, isn't helping us.
No.
So end rant. Now, imagine the following. So I'm going to take us back. I'm going to age myself a little tiny bit to like early college years, to 1991. Okay, so that's 25 years ago. I just did the math on paper. I actually wrote it on paper.
Nice.
I used a calculator and then I wrote it down. So 25 years ago, I was working for Alaska Airlines, and I was working in their production facility, which is where they do maintenance on planes in Oakland. And they were trialing a tablet. Yes, a tablet, a Toughbook tablet that had wireless sending and receiving technologies for the purpose of doing the maintenance checks. And I was tasked with developing the database that could actually run on that thing. And guess what we did? We built forms. We built the what's called the routine maintenance form and the non-routine maintenance forms. And we did the whole process. And here's some of the cool things that we could do back then, which we still don't do now. Mad Libs. So what you do on a routine form is you come up to the cowl and you pull it off the engine and you look for instruction, insert instruction here. You look for corrosion because the plane's been flying up to Alaska and they load it full of fish.
Yeah.
Okay. And oh, look, there's corrosion. Next step, get a non-routine form, fill it out for corrosion. Call the inspector. The FAA guy, called the red shirt guys as they're called, come over and they inspect it and they go, yep, and they fill out this form. And instead of having to write the same thing over and over, zone 21, blah, 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 they just tap on the form and it puts them into the right zone, as they call it. So like left wing, right wing, whatever. Tap on the word corrosion, so they don't have to remember corrosion has 2 R's in it. So everyone's got the same thing going there. And they're done. They tap 3 things and they've actually filled a sentence out. And what's that? Control vocabulary, taxonomy, keywords. Everyone loved it. They just loved it conceptually. I didn't invent this. I was just the young apprentice, if you will, of just what we've been able to do for literally forever with computers. That's a better outcome, a better process than paper. Everybody agreed. Okay, so that's 25 years ago. That's before I even started at Berkeley as an undergrad. So I'm just saying, like, we're still not doing that now. We're like the iPad came out and it's as if we reinvented technology, which we have not. And the kind of information that we can generate is simply better if we do that. It's searchable by design. All of the work of going through and deciding if archaeology has an A or an E in it. You can't, like, someone's got to go through the trouble of like linking all those things together, of the fact that these things are all in a particular area or of a particular topic or whatever. And those are standards that are standards of practice, standards of format, standards of thinking through semantically what things mean. And it just turns out that the more people that can participate in that experience, the better your search will be. That's another thing that's really interesting, is like, but that's why, you know, Google works through magic, right? No, it works through just millions and actually billions and billions of mistakes, people putting in the wrong thing, and then it says, as you know, did you mean blank? And we just can't even approach those concepts when we have, you know, site records that in no way are data. So generating data natively, born digital data, is one goal, but we tended to go to a higher ideal, which is the notion of born archival data, which is to say that as soon as you start from the planning phase into going out and collecting the information all the way through to its end of life in some archive somewhere, the notion is that that's an archival process, that the information gets better over time, and the steps to doing that are really, like, not hard. So
yeah, and I want to ask you about some of those collection methods, like you mentioned at Alaska Airlines, and the stuff that we're doing now, and some possible issues with that I've heard from some people and that I've experienced myself. But real quick now, we're going to take a short break and play a promo for one of our other podcasts. Check it out.
The
CRM Archaeology podcast brings together a panel of cultural resource management professionals to discuss the issues that really matter to the profession. Find out about networking strategies, job hunting, graduate programs, and much more. We'll often feature interviews with college professors, CRM business owners, and experts as well. Check out the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Let's get back to the show.
Okay, we're back, and I wanted to address something that I've heard other people mention, and I'm sure some people are thinking about it on this show right now. And it's one of the I would say fundamental problems that people who are really entrenched in paper might have about going digital. Because one of the things I tell people is exactly what you said, Michael, is the ease of putting together a form where you can create your drop-down menus, you can create your automatically entered information and things like that. And I'm doing that in the field right now. I have a number of drop-downs that we use and radio button checkboxes for different things. But I feel like it needs to be said, especially if somebody's out there creating their own thing right now or doing whatever they're doing, you have to be careful with what you put in a drop-down box sometimes, because just like typing projectile points, which is something I hate to do in the field, you get I've seen a number of things on my project already where, somebody collected a point and they called it something because they thought that's what it looked like. It's not to say that that's not what that thing is, but or what it's colloquially called in this region, but it's putting that instantly into a massive box that carries a lot of baggage with it, right? So all I'm saying is watching what you put in your drop-down boxes and what you put on your radio buttons, because you don't want to automatically put a bias on your data by somebody having to jam that into one of those fields that you pre-selected for them. I guess that goes back to how we're collecting the digital data and how we're crafting these new digital forms that we're creating and how we're making it so not only is it easier and it helps build sentences and takes away some of the tedious stuff for you, but then it also allows you the freedom to put in other things that might be non-standard a little bit, and allow you to put in different information. I don't know. What do you think about that? Have you encountered many situations? I know you've worked on a number of academic projects. Have you encountered any kickback from those guys where you created something for them that had maybe too specific a drop-down menus, or did they just love it entirely?
Well, this is actually great, and I mean, I feel like so far we've done a bit of ranting, so it's time to really like make this a positive thing. So first of all, you and I have had this conversation. We both agree it isn't just about taking the metaphor of a form and making that digital.
Right.
So we're heavily bought into this notion of UX, or user experience, and user-centered design. So in that case, everything that we think that should be done, all who practice this notion, should be helping to encourage people to do the right thing, but also to think. And sometimes those things aren't the same thing, but hopefully they are. So here's an example. If you actually are required on the form in order to, for compliance, to make a decision between A, B, C, or D, apples, oranges, pears, and bananas, then providing those as a pull-down list makes all the sense in the world.
Yep.
If we're asking you to interpret whether or not it's fruit, and we only give you fruit options, that's kind of going to defeat the purpose, right? So, so I'm just saying, it isn't just about that, and that's where decision trees and various kinds of ideas and having free-form text are all great, along with a classic example is this. We deal with this all of the time. There are many times where standards of data require you to do things like this particular thing requires you to put in a date, and that date must be in the following format of YYY, MMDD. But all is it's sometime before 1890. So you know what people will put in? 1890. Because they can't not do that. So you're absolutely right. And that's one factor of it, is if you basically force people to not be able to put things into the margins of the paper, as it were, digitally, they're going to go back to paper. I will go back to paper. If the digital construct doesn't allow me to cheat because I come up with some really bright idea about like, I don't know, well, the forum is basically asking me to put in X, Y, and Z, but I just found X, I found Z, I found D, and I've linked them together and come up with Y. I'm going to do it anyway. So you have to allow and encourage that capability. And then you iterate from there. That's the other thing. It's a nonstop process where, okay, so we tried this thing and this is a favorite. The number one reason why these forums fail is because they're stuck because they cost a lot of money to build in the first place, or a lot of time to build in the first place. We're trying to use tools now that allow people to do what's called RAD, or rapid application development. That's the beautiful thing about the world right now, is that in the world of digital, we can actually use tools that allow us to change up those forms and the way that we collect the data every day if we wanted to. And the best success stories I have are this. I want to just get out this on the record, if it were. I've never lost data. No project we've ever been on has ever lost data, ever. The number one reason people say, I don't want to go digital is because I'm afraid I'm going to blank. Then I will remind them of the story I just heard last year at Mobilizing the Past, where on the Pompeii project, a field director had his entire 3-inch binder full of paper forms, set it on his car, turned around, and the garbage collector threw it into the back of the truck and drove away. Wow. Okay, so there you go. Paper gone, no backup because it's all paper. Yeah. So that's definitely one to think about. And the second is that on this project we did last summer in Israel, I was physically there, but I never got asked questions about how to use the form because we got literally thousands of hours of responses over the last 2 years that went into the design of the form. So it's not a form, it's a process that when you begin your day, the stuff that you see on your screen should be the only things that you need to know about. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Where do I start? Oh, okay. These are the squares I'm interested in digging. I tap on that square. These are the open excavation units, and these are the ones I want to open. I need to create a new one, hit a button, create a new one. I need to assign it to John, tap, and it's assigned to John. Do you see the difference? It's like, it's workflow driven, thinking through the process, putting just in front of you exactly what you need to do. Who wouldn't want that? I mean, I want that, yeah. And there's a great metaphor for that. And that we use a lot, which is this notion of TurboTax. So basically what happens in most of the way that we record anything, and this is so far beyond archaeological data, just think about anything. If we give people the end result, the form, without the process, if I told you in order for you to do your taxes, you need to know what goes in this box for all of your expenses last year, go. Yeah, well, you just can't fill in the box, right? I mean, you had to go out and collect the odometer readings at the beginning. You had to remember to collect the odometer readings at the beginning of the year. Everyone forgets. All of you listening, you didn't do it last year. I take a picture now in my phone every year of my odometer, and then I just have to search for January 1st, and there it is. Okay, that's the difference. The difference is like, if we have people collect the form data, which is the end of the story, then of course it's going to be a fail. So what TurboTax does is it asks you a lot of questions, and the encouragement is that red blocks at the top of the right-hand corner that basically is red, that says you owe $7,000 to the federal government. And then as you answer more questions, as you go through these questions, you never see a form. You just keep answering questions, and they're kind of, and some of them are actually kind of fun. And then you get through that whole process, and hopefully it's turned green, or it's a number you can live with. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. Meanwhile, in the background, it's actually filling out all the forms for you. That is what we're trying to do with Codifi, is the notion of like, okay, well, I'm here, I'm in California, so I fill out this stuff, and at the end of the day, it generates the form. So putting the form in its place, just dispelling the notion of what we're trying to do by going paperless is actually simply presenting you more paper in a digital form.
Absolutely. And I think what you said right there is key to this whole thing, is really kind of getting rid of the form. The form is not necessary. The form is a throwback to when we needed prompts for what to actually write down about a site, right? And, agencies were probably upset about getting typed up on typewriters, or even probably handwritten notes basically about sites that were found. And at some point they probably said, you know what, it'd be really nice if everybody turned in a site form that had this, and this on it. And over time that evolved into, the site forms that we have today in various states. But the form is it's just a memory jogger. That's all it is. And there's no reason for it anymore. So if we had a digital way to answer these questions about the site, like you say, and then that information is not even in a ideal situation. I mean, it's 2016 for Christ's sake. It's not even going onto a form in the background. It's literally just going into a database that you can query. And after you're done answering questions about the site, you can then ask the database questions and say, now give me answers. I've given you all this information. Now give me answers. And then we hit a button, send that straight over to the agency that we're working with, and can do the same thing, but now for the entire state, not just your project. You can query that information for the whole state. But I think, I mean, that's going to be a while before the agencies are ready to do that. But we can at least get them ready for it by recording in a way that we don't actually need the form. The only reason we spit out a form is because the agency needs it, but we're creating data that is usable in another way. And then when they're ready for it, we'll already be there. That's where I want to go.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I'm more and more encouraged by some of the things that we're now encountering in terms of this. Let's not forget, I'm old enough to know that the tax forms have actually improved over time. I can't imagine what life was like anymore before TurboTax, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the whole Paperless Reduction Act is a kind of a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they time how long it takes you to do that paper form. And the idea is to make that process more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
We can kind of invert that by basically saying, let's think through what our outcomes are. So this, I would feel like I really have not done my job if we don't talk about the actions that we're doing in the field, the outcomes of those actions that are actually, as you said, that are actually supported by the memory jogger. So let's just take we could both kind of do this, but back to the whole data therapy thing. It's like a day in the life. So all the things you need to record if you're doing CRM include things like mileage, hours of how many people are working when, all those little things, your per diems, all those things are being carried in your head. Then when you actually get to do your survey, you're going to record the various things that you're finding, the actual locations where you're finding those things. I start querying questions like, does time matter? Let's just play with this just for 1 second. Does the time of day matter when you're doing survey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does the lighting matter when you're doing survey?
Yep.
Does it matter that it was sunny versus overcast that day?
Yeah.
Are you going to Are you going to have a better time finding things if you're wearing, polarized sunglasses on a overcast day than when it's, raining or bright sun or noon? And the answer to all those things, of course, is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if you're going to be doing things like using Munsell, are you going to, or a color chart, does it matter, under what conditions you're documented this? Does it matter whether or not your subject is wet or dry?
Mm-hmm.
We can do this all day long, and that's suddenly you realize, wait a minute, wow, there's so many things I could be thinking about and could be recording. And those who if you're lucky enough to be doing kind of more of a kind of research oriented project, you actually get to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's talk about how you might record that stuff. So you want to take a GPS point because you want to get a location. You want to take some pictures. You want to be able to record some things. If you're doing environmental work, audio might actually come into play. You might actually want to record the sound of that bird that's in that particular nest. Video, incredibly useful. Just being able to take an audio note is like, I'm not so much sure about what the hell this thing is, but it might be something really cool or whatever. If I'm actually asking informants to have, or subject matter experts, recording a video, a little audio recording, all of these things go such a long way to helping us build a much more rich and dynamic record. Except that if we go back to CRM, you actually have to make a couple of crazy decisions, which which suck. If I'm going to record it and I'm going to report it, I have to write it down in some form of photo log, which is nightmarish and painful. And B, if I don't do that, then I have to have yet a different system, some form of shadow system for managing all of those things.
Right.
Back to what we're trying to do with Codifi, it's just like, it's actually about digital asset management. It's about, yes, you are taking pictures, you're generating documents, you're recording GPS tracks, you're using a total station, you might be generating XML, you might be putting stuff into ArcGIS. All those things are actually happening. And so it is about really thinking through the total information ecology, end to end and archivally. And that, again, really transcends beyond archaeology. So here are the encouragements. Training, learning to do these things, produces better information, produces better knowledge, produces better data, can equal pay raises, can equal you getting hired for better jobs. So there's lots of great carrots there. So basically thinking through the variety of different things that we can do to just improve this whole process, I feel is like that's the sharp point of the stick right now.
All right, so we're going to take another short break and then come back and wrap all this up and give everybody the answers to every question they've ever wanted to know.
All these things we make no apology for the study of archaeology, but we don't do dinosaurs.
Did aliens build Stonehenge? Did the Easter Island statues walk? Did the Vikings colonize Midwest America? What does mainstream archaeology have to say about all of this? Listen to the Archaeological Fantasies podcast and learn about popular archaeological mysteries. Hoax or fact? Learn to tell the difference with Dr. Kenneth Fader and co-host Sarah of the Archae Fantasies blog. Check out the show on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Archae Fantasies and get ready to think critically. Let's get back to the show.
Funny beady blokes you will see are a staple of archaeology.
All right, we're back for our last segment, and before the show, Michael brought up an article from another host on the Archaeology Podcast Network, Mr. Bill White, and we'll link to his article that we're going to talk about here in a second in the show notes. As we are linking to all the other things that were mentioned, those will all be in the show notes for this episode. So check that out. But Michael, why don't you introduce Bill's article, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, so it's funny. I tend to try to do the Google search for paperless archaeology, and I just came across it a couple of days ago. And I wrote to him like I'd forgotten entirely who it was, because senility kicks in when you're about 40 years old.
Exactly.
So the article is great. It's tongue in cheek. It's called "Warning: Do Not Do Paperless Archaeology," and it's got some fantastic statements in it. So I definitely encourage everyone to read it. It's principally kind of CRM focused. He brings up some important points about the fact that he has this analogy, as he calls it, which is taking a look at like paperless archaeology debate is similar to when we cut the landline and have gone to cell phones, and how it's basically digital is here, it's ubiquitous, and yet digital technologies aren't, and tools actually specifically don't do archaeology. And that's absolutely true. And I think if there's anything that I got out of our conversation today, is that we're really trying to iterate and riff on the notion of what we really want to do is encourage everybody to just is to think, act, and share, and figure out ways of doing that. And digital tools are extraordinarily useful for doing those things, but they're not crutches. I really like a lot of what you were saying earlier, Chris, about how forms can kind of stifle the imagination, and then we'll figure out workarounds around it. Similarly, I feel like that's true about many of the forms that we're dealing with physical and digital tools. The physical forms stop us from doing things, and using a Trimble or can also be a challenge depending on what you're doing. It does some things extraordinarily well, and other things are more challenging, and that's true of basically every tool that we're doing.
Yeah.
So please chime in, and then I'll tell you how we're trying to do things a little bit differently with Codifi. But go for it.
Yeah. Well, one thing about Bill's article, and I had read it too when it came out. This was back in September, I think he said, and of course Bill's article was a little tongue in cheek because, like you said, because he really is all for the digital stuff, but he did have, we've had conversations before, and he might be coming to this from a way that other people see it too, and I want to alleviate those fears, or at least say, come at it from a different direction, because a lot of people that are friends with me and probably a lot of people that are friends with you know how much we talk about, digital archaeology, using tablets, using whatever, and recording things digital. And it's not really just for the sake of using new and fun technology, although that is a side benefit when you're in this business, that you can justify to your spouse the purchase of the latest tablet that came out. Hey, it's research, right? So, it's not just about using the fanciest tools and the fanciest toys, and it's not just about doing all this stuff for no reason whatsoever. And one of Bill's things that he said in his article was that, don't let the tools get in the way of the archaeology, right? And one of the things that I think that needs to be understood about where we would like digital archaeology to go, for lack of a better term, is digital archaeology is not just recording into a customized form with drop-down menus on a tablet. That's just a facet of digital archaeology. Digital archaeology is actually what can you do with that data after you collect it. And I think one of the things I said in the pre-show here was that I can foresee a time, and there's obviously people doing this right now with big academic projects, and there's grad students out there that are going and digitizing a whole bunch of site forms and then doing these meta-analysis on different things. But I can see a time in the future where we'll have recorded a lot of stuff on a landscape, and which we already have, but there are some counties out here in the West and some counties elsewhere where a lot of the counties already been recorded. Like, a lot of the counties already been surveyed in one way, shape, or form or another. And instead of a class one, or instead of an early phase survey, whatever you want to call it, it's just called different things around the country. Instead of that being going out and doing shovel tests again, or going out and doing pedestrian survey again, you actually do archaeology on the database. And you query the database for all these different things and all this amazing amount of information that's already been collected. I mean, right now, some people might be saying to themselves, well, we already do that when we do a literature search. But we absolutely do not do that when we do literature search. A literature search right now is, what other reports were written? Sure, we can look at their conclusions and find out what they did, but we can't really see their data. We can kind of see their data in the form of the site records that they turned in, and maybe in some tables that they might have in their site report if they really did a good job. But that's not really looking at their data. I want to see their raw data. I want to be able to query and say, how many tertiary obsidian flakes did you guys find? And I don't want to have to digitize all their information to find that. I want to know exactly what they were and where they were, and tie that database to a GIS so I can see all that stuff in real time. And that's what I think, where Bill is right. We shouldn't make these tools that we're using get in the way of doing archaeology. But if we use these tools the right way, they can be better than a shovel. They can be better than our trowels, and they can become the archaeological tools themselves, sort of creating the archaeological tools of tomorrow rather than having them get away of our other archaeological tools. I don't know. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. I mean, so for example, I was at a conference, they're talking about scanning, so laser scanning.
Yeah.
There's been something like, there's been no less than 13 complete laser scanning surveys of Pompeii.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and the reason that is because there's this, I'm going to bring up this other magical word, which is proprietary. Now, sometimes things become proprietary in the sense that that means not shareable or not shared, like code, but also data.
Right.
By virtue of the fact that they have just, it's a university, they tried to do an experiment or whatever. Sometimes it can be based on the law, et cetera. So I actually feel that paper records, the records as we're generating them now, are proprietary by design. If you do a literary search and you find a literature search, and all you're doing is getting a list of documents that you then have to pore over to figure out some form of outcome as to whether or not you should do a survey in this particular area, you're just basically doing the same work over and over and over again. So that sounds cool. So let's do some shout outs here. So TDAR is really looking at a way of focusing specifically on things like CRM data to make it much more usable. if you combine that with the ideas and the ideals of something like open context, where then we can literally get down to exactly what you described because it's actually data, and you can start to say, okay, these 17 sites, or if you go to Dyna and look at entire like thousands of sites across a landscape or across states, you can really start to do some very interesting trend analysis. Now, both organizations said all of the costs of putting in things into TDAR and open context have to do with the fact that they have to do so much epic cleanup of the data to make it even possible to put in, because the data weren't collected with the intention of this. That's what we're talking about. That is exactly what we're talking about, is thinking through how you want your data to be shared. So if we collect it in a way that actually will produce data that can be shared, then we'll be able to do amazing things with it. And I don't know about you, but if I had to spend my time doing a search, I would rather be actually doing analysis at the very same moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So okay, these guys have the stuff, and we've gone through the process of finding that the stuff is there, whether it's an information center, a library, what have you. But our expectation now is that it's going to be at Google. We're going to be able to do the search, find exactly what we're looking for. It's going to be at the top 10 list. Or I'm going to say, give me, or like going to Amazon and going shopping, and you're going to be able to click some buttons and boom, bang, boom, and get exactly, the snowboarding boots that you're looking for by virtue of hitting 3 things. That's only possible by faceting the data by design. It's not magic. That's the other thing. It's not magic. It's actually not magic. It's just hard work, or designing the data to actually be searchable by design. So, so I'll stop there. But then, yeah, I'm really excited to talk about some of the things we're going to try to do with Codifi.
Now, speaking of Codifi, let's talk about this. We've talked about data and how to collect it, and well, not how to collect it, but like what to collect and what we can do with it, and things like that. So let's bring Codifi into this, and exactly how we're collecting. People have heard me talk about on this podcast tap forms. That's the thing I'm using right now because that's the best solution I could find that was affordable. I didn't see the point, like some other firms have done, in spending $100,000 to $200,000 and creating an application that I've got to stay on top of, with Apple's updates every 3 months, and make sure I've got a developer on hand that can make it so my app doesn't break, and all my field crews are like, hey, this update didn't work, and now the app's crashing every 3 seconds. I didn't want to get into that because this space is changing so quickly. So I went with something that was a little more modifiable by me, and I could use it and change it on the fly and do whatever I needed to do. And but that being said, I will drop that in a minute if something better comes along, because that's the way science works. And that brings me to Codifi. So what is Codifi? What are we going to say about that?
All right. So Codifi is 2 things really in my head. One is it absolutely is going to be a product. Now, product. Is it going to be a product like Lightroom or ArcGIS,
right,
that has a particular price point? That's to be determined. But a product in terms of something that you can depend on, like a trowel. I feel like this is a really important statement. I'm not going to beat around the bush and talk about, well, we're going to do this thing and we're going to produce this open source software that won't be supported. So everything that we've been doing so far to date has been about producing things that can be supported. So just a real quick version of this story goes like this. So again, Mukudu CMS, open source software. It's been 5 years and about $2.5 million of development to make open source software that works, that's supportable, and that's completely documented, and it's open for everyone to do with it whatever they will. And we finally accomplished that. And again, a great shout out to Washington State University, but also to IMLS and NEH and everyone else who's helped to fund that effort, and to hundreds of people around the world that all have contributed to making that code base amazing and awesome. It's also built on something called Drupal, which has over 250,000 developers worldwide, literally 250,000 people who are all trying to make it better. So what I want to see you do, and this is the great experiment, and by the way, this is the invitation to you and everyone else listening. we're unapologetically going to talk about the notion of modular code. So while we'll start using the tools that we're going to use to make it work on, say, iPads and iPhones and Windows Surface tablets and PCs and Macs, just like you, if there's a different instrument, like a different technological platform to make Codify work on that's better, we'll do that too. But for now, we're working on this. So let's just talk about what modular code means real briefly.
Okay.
So if you're doing a particular type of archaeology in the Northwest, or you're working on an archaeological project in Syria or in Mississippi, yes, the archaeology is the same, except that it isn't. So in the sense that we get punished by the virtue of the notion of generalizable tools, like using Excel or Word or even ArcGIS in a more generalizable brute force sort of way. And then we come up with endless workarounds to address the shortfalls of that particular tool. I mean, I love Adobe Lightroom, and we use 5% of its functions. Everyone talks about Photoshop the same way.
Right.
So what we want to do is have a very modular, very lean approach to design. So for example, if you're not doing survey, and you're never doing survey, but you're doing tons of excavation, then we call that a composition. So the composition will be the modules that come together to help you do the excavation the way that you want to do that. If you're using a total station, then you have to have a module that allows you to use a total station. But if you're using a GPS, using RTK unit, then there should be a module that does that. So I'm encouraging everyone who's interested, who has ideas around what they would like to see be part of a modular approach to design, to get in touch, because that's what we've been doing. And that's been kind of the secret to the success here. So for example, we've come up with we'll call it a composition that's worked really well in Israel, Jordan, and strangely enough, also in Ethiopia, because all of these guys have very similar approach, a locus system approach to excavation, and the excavation unit, and the way pottery buckets and the kind of notions and the terms that are being used that works generally. Where things get more interesting is the specifics. So if on my project, we call them pottery, we call them bags as opposed to buckets, right? Or baskets as opposed to buckets, then the expectation when I say PB is that it in fact means basket. Now that may seem like a very subtle thing, but believe it or not, if I have a paper form and I put the word basket on it, then I'm done, right? That's better than software. Okay. Seriously, think about that. How many times have we had to use software and bend the way that we work in order to make the software work? That's not cool. So the entire intention of Codify is to make it possible for people to configure all the terms that actually matches to the way they work. It won't be a perfect match, of course, but I really feel like this can actually be possible. And I feel like that's what's happening. So we're looking at building these different compositions, understanding the different type of modules that need to exist. And yes, we're really going to dedicate an entire company, Codify Inc., which is a benefit corporation, towards actually making this real. But I want to point out another thing, and it's like this is a new startup venture. We've learned a lot from being the Center for Digital Archaeology. My dream and my intention, as we have done successfully now with these other things, is to, when I say make it affordable, I mean really truly make it affordable so that it will be adopted. It's not going to be like a juggernaut kind of methodology. Like our intention is not to become the next Microsoft or Esri. Instead, it is to produce better archaeological data. And it's been wonderful now talking with my colleagues. We're all a bit, rightfully, let's say, competitive, and everyone finally getting to understand the approach that I'm taking. It's an approach that's approachable. It's an approach that's human. So it isn't like, okay, we've heard from 1,000 people, here's this product and it sells for $5,000, right? It's not that at all. It is about like, let's get the code out there, let's publish the code, And how we'll like make this organization sustainable most likely will be through, as we've done it in the past, through services, through our own training ventures, for doing projects, for building crazy bespoke things that will only work for 3 people but are really cool. That's the idea. So so we're excited. So timing wise, we will have a version of Codifi 2.0. It is, after 3 years, that is what it will be, coming out in April, specifically to focus on the way that archaeology is being done, as I mentioned, in Israel and Jordan and kind of the Middle East. We're working on a Codifi CRM, which is focusing mostly on California, Nevada, and New Mexico style archaeology. And that's been amazing. And anyone has ideas for that, we want to hear about it. Maybe like, I don't know, Chris, for example, as the example. And we'll just take the ideas, and we'll figure out how to get it funded, and we'll start building better paperless tools. We're focusing a lot of energy on photogrammetry, and specifically on and just dealing with the literally thousands of pictures that you need to take.
Yeah.
And so there are a variety of different, it's called like research ventures that we're focusing on. So I've never been this excited. We've just started this kind of new venture at the beginning of the year, and it's been a bit overwhelming by the amount of interest and engagement. But the best part is, unlike any time I've ever done this in the past, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, 10 years of beating our heads against the wall of like, hey guys, have you ever thought about taking this paperless? Like, go away. is the amount of exuberance and excitement that basically everyone I'm talking to and listening to, there is a huge amount of excitement, and that gets me up in the morning. It's really exciting. So yeah, any questions you have, I'm willing to talk about. I know we're running out of time, but
well, no, this is great, because that kind of wraps it all up. We talked about all of it, and now we're going to have a nice, easy way to collect this information, because there's a 500 different ways out there right now that people could quote unquote go paperless if they wanted to, but some of them are way better than others, and a lot of them have issues, and it would be nice to have, like you said, a somewhat customizable solution, so you can just take the tools that you need out into the field. And also, to reiterate something you said earlier, a couple things you said earlier about the TurboTax deal, and answering questions, and then about equating sites from, say, Israel to New Mexico. This isn't rocket science; it's archaeology. So a site, no matter where you're at in the world, has some of the similar parameters, similar characteristics. They're not all identical, obviously, but there are similarities. There are similarities in what you record and how you record, and creating a simple tool to do that with, that is partially customizable to help with those non-similarities, is perfect. And that's all we need. We don't need, what I wouldn't like to see, and which I think we'll probably actually see a little bit of moving forward. Hopefully not. Hopefully they'll be smarter than that. But, we have 50 different site forms in the 50 United States, because states are independent. SHPOs are independent for the most part. Other agencies are independent. The BLM is independent, and other agencies that create their own forms, not realizing that, this has all come up in a situation where they couldn't really talk to each other easily, so they had to come up with their own solution. But now we can start coming up with unified solutions, because I'm recording a site in California, Nevada, New Mexico, Mississippi, New England somewhere. I can probably use the same form for about 90% of recording that site. And there's only a couple small things in there I might have to add in for my particular area. But for the most part, it's all the same. And then we can spit out the form that they need. And that's the goal later on. I think that the ultimate goal is to have archaeologists do archaeology again, and not worry about what, did I miss a certain block on a form or something like that. So anyway, I think we're gonna wrap this up. Any final thoughts on all this? Like, in the last, say, 60 seconds here, what's your blue sky goal for all this? Where do you want to see this in? I was going to say 10 years, but really 5 years. It's changing too fast to say 10 years. 10 years, it'll all be holographic. So,
or it'll be reverted back to paper.
Right. Well, exactly. We're at the tipping point where that's going to happen. So where would you like to see it, though?
Yeah. So I point out that 2020 is in 4 years. I thought it was in 5, but I didn't do the math so well. So, imagine that. Like we were talking about this earlier, and so I basically would say I would love to see um, our ability to collect is the 3 C's of what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
Our ability to collect information and data, and also make and have at our fingertips while we're collecting it the full breadth and width of all the information that has been already collected at our fingertips while we're making those decisions in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So the three C's we talk about are collect, curate, and connect. And by that we basically mean go out and collect the most amazing, rich information you possibly can, because many times in archaeology, what does make us unique is you get one chance to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be, if you excavate it, you don't get a second chance. Curate that information, make it as easy as possible for us to produce better information and put curatorial tools into our fingertips. Again, not translating stuff and copy and paste it from one Microsoft Word document to the next, but really having the tools to transform information and make it archival, which means, okay, so I have these files in one format that actually have to be turned into a different format. Making that as easy as possible, I absolutely believe that we'll have those tools by 2020. And the third is connect, meaning there is no right one way of doing this. And we're seeing, just look at how much the web has changed in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And everyone says that, but it actually is really true. And there's been an explosive change in just the last couple of years. So I'm envisioning a future where information is both much more compartmentalized, meaning less centrally located, by virtue of the fact that we have figured out a way to share it ethically, to share it responsibly, right?
Right.
That comes back to collecting the information in the right way so it actually can be shared. I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. And we're very, very open-minded to hearing all sorts of ways that we should be able to make that happen. So I think archaeology in 2020 is going to be awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave you with this then, because my one suggestion for Codifi is that it connects directly to Oculus within the next 3 months. So
I'm so getting right on that as soon as I go, like drink my own blood. But yeah, I'm on it. That'll be after I drink my own blood. The next thing I do is build it for Oculus the next 3 months.
Outstanding. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Michael. This was awesome. And when you get some more stuff out, we'll have you back on to talk about it. And we'll just keep this conversation going.
All right. Thank you so much.
That's it for another episode of the ArchaeoTech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag ArchaeoTech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to archpodnet.com/members for more info.